Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom podcast, issue number 2.
Boom!
Hello, everybody. We're back with issue number 2. I'm your host, John Cimino, with the co-host over here.
Yes, and it's me, Steve Houston.
And below us, we're going to thank Otto from the Grotto, 3 Men in a Basement, for always doing the technical support for us and throwing in his 2 cents because he loves this stuff too.
I love it too, man. If I give you my 3 cents, I'll have a lot more fun too. So thank you very much.
Today's episode is all about a spotlight. Now, what do we spotlight? We said in the first episode that we were going to talk, passionately about stuff. You got a little bit of our background. Now you're going to get into the, as Steve likes to say, the weeds of it. The weeds of it. Steve, tell them what we're going to talk about today.
All right. So not only are we going to talk about my favorite Thor story of all time, we're going to talk about a story that completely changed my collecting and reading life. And you're probably thinking, oh, come on, Steve, don't be so melodramatic. I am not joking. Let's go back a little bit first. I began reading comics, of course, when I was a Hulk fanatic. I was Hulk. No one could make me read anything else. I think maybe I was approaching John Cimino levels of Hulk maniac. And one of my best friends who had got me into comics, he hated Thor. And we'd always go, because, Hulk didn't really ever have a clean victory over Thor. And being youngsters and being, we were allowed to be immature, okay? He'd be like, yeah, I hate Thor. And I'm like, yeah, he's a part of crap. Well, you know how things happen. And I was finally going through and sorting through my English reprints of comics, and I put them in order. And I was like, okay. And finally, I got to some stories because the English reprints were split between a front story and a second one. I'd always been reading the front stories. Then, of course, I ran out of material to read. I'm like, let's go to the second stories. What is it? And it happened to be this story. And it featured Thor. And, of course, I was only reading the black and white versions. But after I read that first sequence, my life was completely different. I was like, oh my God, I love Thor.
Now, Steve, you have a little bit of explaining to do on this because I went back and I read this little series that you did that you love in our trusty Essential Thor. You got to explain something to me because I know you will as you go into detail about this, but it ends on such a cliffhanger. I almost wanted to, how I don't understand how you didn't put the final. There's another issue in there. Like I said, you're going to have to explain because I was like, I wanted to keep going. And I was like, Steve, what are you talking about? I'm sorry, Steve. It was like an erection. And then I wanted to know why. Why did you put me through that? Please.
Well, that is a very good point. And I could have stretched it out forever. I could have gone to issue 193, which one thing leads into another, because obviously in issue 190, where it ends, there's a little sequence where there's a cliffhanger. You're thinking, okay, what's happening? Now Hela's going to go after Thor, but I didn't go into that issue. You found that out yourself. I love that myself, but I was just talking about the saga of Infinity, okay. Mostly. And I couldn't cut off issue 189 and 190 because that's too much of a cut. However, I have to be an editor, and I have to say, because otherwise I'll go all the way up to 225, and people are on this podcast for 19 days straight. Blood coming from people's eyes and ears. So That's why.
Okay, so just so people at home should understand, we're going to be talking about the Mighty Thor issues 184 to 190. So, Steve, here's the first issue of that. Go ahead, Steve, take it away. This is all you. Tell us why we need to kill ourselves for this. Tell them. Tell them.
Well, again, when I first read this, imagine where I am. I'm a young guy. I have no experience reading a lot of material. I don't know that Stan Lee had been writing the title for like 8 years. To me, it's just another story. When it came to the art, I had read some back issues featuring John Buscema's Fantastic Four, so I was sort of, aware of it. But this was the first time that I was exposed to the Stan Lee and John Buscema era, their work. Now, the issue opens up with what I love the most. It's just sheer, overwhelming melodrama. Thor is returning to Asgard. He's looking around, and his fellow Asgardians are cowering in the corners going, oh, there's a threat coming. And I was always like, well, okay, I know the Asgardians are pretty tough. What can they be scared of? And I really loved the concept of Thor coming back to Asgard thinking, okay, the realm eternal, everything's good. But wait a minute, something's wrong here. I'm going to have to find out what's going on here. Why are my fellow Asgardians so scared? What is, making them terrified in the streets? So
just let me say that the name of that issue is The World Beyond. That's what the titles are always epic. So go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry.
So what I really loved about the issue was this issue, and it became a template for all of my reading up until this day. I love melodrama. If you're going to show someone that's scared, I want them to look like they're scared and cowering. I need that. I don't need some subtle art where someone says, oh, I think I'm scared. No. And I didn't realize, but of course I'm reading John Buscema. It's just beautiful, flowing art. And I loved seeing Asgard in all of its beauty.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second, Steve, and I want to agree with you there. I'm going to go to hot stuff levels of fire of how good John Buscema, not just him, but Joe Sinnott's ink is absolutely every panel is like Picasso. And what makes this series that Steve is talking about so good is that the art was consistent in every issue. It went every issue. And even in black and white, looking through these essentials, it was godlike. I once again, the erection was there. It was through the roof. It was through the roof. I'm sorry, Steve, but yes, the art was so good.
Yes. So again, this is during my formative era of reading and collecting. And of course, I was not reading the original American copies because they did not exist in England. So I read them in black and white just the way as they appear in that essential. So John got a good sense of exactly how I was reading. I was reading it in black and white. So, okay, Thor has just returned to Asgard. Everyone is terrified. He goes to see Odin himself. And even Odin is sort of like, oh, there's a threat coming. And I even then I was like, well, isn't Odin supposed to be like the main man? Can he really be scared of something? So immediately, Stan is building up this melodrama. And in my mind, I'm thinking, what on earth? I mean, Odin just snaps his fingers and things get done. How on earth is he going to be scared or, even, worried about anything? Isn't he, the word and the way? So I was hooked. I was like, okay, I'm reading this issue. I loved, again, this is my introduction to mainly his supporting cast, the Warriors 3, and that. And I was like, wow, he's got some great teammates. I love this. And of course, the Lady Sif, because this is, at the time when there's no Jane Foster. Thank you. So I'm like, oh yeah, this is really good. And then, of course, we get into issue 185. It has that great cover. And you have that massive, big, mysterious, ominous hand just crushing, going to crush
the blacks and the blues on this, Steve. My God.
Oh.
This is something that when you see in a nice Mylar or in a CGC case, this must just pop right at you. And the
Oh,
pose and the infinity on it, man. This is goodness right here.
Yeah, and the name of this issue is "In the Grip of Infinity."
yes. So we keep hearing this thing, infinity, and it's like, well, what is this? What is infinity? And then we're introduced to the Silent One. And I just love these standoffish type characters, just sort of watching from afar, and, Thor's like, wait a minute, let me smash the Silent One aside. And, Odin's like, oh, no, hold on. Let's just listen to what the Silent One has to say. So we're leading somewhere. And basically, as a youngster, my trepidation is building and building. Each page that I'm turning, I'm trying to think out like, all right, how are they going to get out of this? There's no way. If Odin is scared, Thor's done. And, I've seen Thor fight, you look and all those guys. That's great. But how in the hell is he going to fight a huge hand enveloping, universes and planets? So then it gets to a point, I think it's in issue 186, where they have to discover, the mystery of infinity. And by the way, people always ask me, why do I love Hela so much? Let's just take a moment and look at that. Oh, my word. I know there's lots of people out there, they're like, oh, I love Black Cat. I love, Mary Jane. Hela is just gorgeous.
And this issue is called Worlds at War.
Yes.
You like the dominating women. You need like the woman that can handle you, right? So you're a big cat.
I do want to say though, that is a great costume. And Steve, I must say, even from the movie, right? I thought she was great in the movie. I thought she did a fantastic job to see her on a huge screen. Hela doesn't get the props that she should as a female villain. I mean, it's fantastic. Her outfit, her costume. I understand, man. I dig it.
Yes. Funny thing is, it wasn't until years later, and I'm sure John also remembers this, that Walt Simonson revealed that actually half of her is dead and half of her face is a skeleton.
Right, yeah, she's a skeleton.
I remember I was like, oh, no. That's, I don't like that idea.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want her half dead. And I remember I was like repulsed. I was like, oh no. So in my mind, I blanked that out a little bit, like, oh, there's my Hela, So basically, we're getting to a point where Thor is going to have to learn the secret of infinity. And again, now this is Stan. Now, Stan wasn't, a writer that worked from 5,000 different subplots as Roy and Steve Englehart and Jerry Conway would do later. Stan used to like to work on a single narrative with just maybe a couple little flashbacks to stories. That was it. It wasn't like a wide, expansive story. So basically, he has a little flashback sequence where Hela tries to gain Odin's soul. And of course, she's rebuffed. However, there's a little sequence in there where you can see that her power is so much that she pulls a portion of Odin's strength away, like another facet of his being away. Okay. And then that being is so powerful that it actually gains its own sentience and its own life, but without any of the good of Odin, and basically in the will of Hela, and is just basically a huge manifestation of just pure evil. So it's the direct evil twin
and
of Odin.
seeing Thor grow old in in his fight with Hela in that issue too. Magnificently done. Like every panel is just it's just so good. It's so good.
And it just goes to show you, and now maybe people have forgotten, Hela was extremely powerful. There is Thor dying. He was done. The story was over. And then the Silent One, this mysterious being comes along, has like a little tear coming out of his eye.
Yeah.
And, he's like, wait a minute, for the greater good, the Thor cannot pass. He has a mission to accomplish, sacrifices himself, and Thor's back alive, and Hela's gone off. She doesn't even realize that the Silent One would do that. Right. And again, it's just building up, more of the suspense.
How good that cliffhanger. You must have been insane when it said Thor versus Odin in the next issue.
Oh,
Like that must
I
have been
can only
insane.
imagine what it was like for the readers who were buying this originally off the rack in 1971 to have to wait a whole month. Luckily for me, I just pulled that issue and went, and I was diving in immediately. And by the way, by this time, I wasn't even looking at the first story. I was going right to these second stories. Thor was now the preeminent store that I was going, reading. Luckily enough, thank Odin and Zeus, I had all the issues in a run. If I'd been missing one of the issues, I might not be here today. I might have just thrown myself under a truck. So again, now we have to understand the mystery of infinity. And there's a great section where Thor goes into this little special chamber to learn the secret. And then everyone's outside and and even Loki's like, I've got to get in there. He doesn't know what he's doing. And he tries to get in there. And then finally the door opens. And Thor is standing in the doorway and he's just doing this look. He's looking down. And by the way, Thor is always, I'm Thor. He's like this. And then he's looking up, he's got this little face. He's like, I know the secret of infinity. I know it's all lost. And I'm thinking, so again, Stan's ability to wring the cliffhangers out of you. I mean, people learn that today. The only modern writer that's got close to that is a guy called Tom DeFalco.
Yeah.
Okay. He just literally, he rings it. There was no way on earth you were not going to read that next issue. Okay.
And
that knew your secret, but we didn't know it yet.
Yeah. That issue was called "The World Is Lost," and that's what. And then when you see the what is it, the Odin sword, right?
Yes. Again, grandeur. Okay. And it's really funny. As soon as the Odin sword is unsheathed, Ragnarok comes. It's like, well, why is that sword there? What are we doing? And I say, my young mind was like, oh my God. And then of course, I'm beginning to realize as I'm halfway through this story, there is more meat in there. There is more melodrama in this story than any Spider-Man that I've read. Okay.
Yeah.
Any X-Men or anything that I've come across. This is different. This is a different world. They're not on Earth. There's no robbers and banks. This is a grand story. So it feeds into something that I didn't know I needed at that time. I hadn't yet broken into the cosmic world. And now this was my entryway. Again, opening up my mind, and getting away from, I got to read my Hulk will smash. Now, I'm seeing giant hands envelop universes. Okay, I'm seeing the Silent One. I'm seeing Hela. I'm seeing a wondrous world drawn to perfection by the masters of their art. And I am totally sucked in. And even halfway through, I was always thinking, I'm going to have to add Thor to my subscription list. Even though I didn't know what was going on at Thor in the contemporary time. We'll go into that a little bit later.
Yeah.
So we get to the point, we're moving on to the story, and basically the secret of infinity is, that of course Odin is this, his evil twin is this terrible entity, very powerful. So now we get to the point where Odin and Thor are going to have to team up and try and, defeat this menace. And it's not going too well, and there's these great scenes where the cowardly Loki, he's always like, well, I can't die. I've got to find a way of doing it. And so he does there's this great little subplot going on where he teams up with Karnilla. And this was my first exposure to Karnilla. I didn't know what the Norn Queen was. I didn't know.
Yeah, she's awesome.
So I was like, wow, these characters just keep popping out of nowhere. It's like, boom, boom, boom. And of course, if I'd read Thor for many years, I would know who these characters were. So I just thought that Karnilla was just a member of the Asgardian court. I would learn later on, when I get some back issues, just about how, bad Karnilla was back in the day.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that, even the villains, were panicking. They're like, well, you know what? For the greater good, we're going to help Odin and Thor. We're going to help them try and defeat this menace. And finally, there's a little sequence where the power bolt comes from Karnilla and Loki. of a massive amount. You can imagine that both of their mystical energies combined. We're talking about an amazing amount of power. Combined with Odin and combined with Thor, they managed to break Odin free of this evil. The evil in Odin dissipates the evil. And
that was in issue 188, correct? Am I correct? Yeah. So
188, it's dissipated.
Yeah, the end of infinity, correct.
The end of infinity. And, I was thinking, at the time, wow, what is unbelievable? And then you turn to the last 2 pages, and then, Odin's not celebrating or anything. And he's like, well, Hela, she had a goal in mind. If she can't get me, she's going to be coming for you. And I was like, well, he survived once because of the Silent One. What's he going to do now? Hence, another Stan Lee cliffhanger where he's ringing it, and you just see his face like that, like, there was no way you weren't going to buy the issue. So,
okay. Yeah, and so that was at the end. So that was at the end when Hela Cup, right? That was at the end going into 189, correct?
Yes.
When
now,
they said, yeah.
189 has that glorious cover. Hela's up in the air. And
I'm sorry.
It's truly a moment for me where I became a Hela fanatic, because there's a sequence where she's going to come to Earth. Because Odin says, okay, I can't. The only thing I can do is try and hide you. Boom, sent him to Earth. You're not going to get away from Hela. Okay.
The icy touch of death.
Yes. Oh, just the best. So Thor's on Earth, and he even transforms himself back to Don Blake. It's like, okay, if I just keep with Don Blake, maybe I can escape her touch. She comes down to Earth. Now just think, I've been eating a huge bowl of ice cream, reading this story, and the cherry is about to be dropped on top of the icing. Because there's a sequence where she comes down to Earth and she transforms herself into human garb. And she's dressed in this Russian-type clothing, has this long, tall hat. And she is the most beautiful woman that I think John Buscema ever drew. She had these beautiful little dark eyes. Yeah. And I was just like, oh, my word. And even as a kid, I said to myself, I have to find a woman like that.
Wait, Steve, with skulls in their eyes? Because doesn't she have
that comes later? But I was willing to take that. I said, if a woman looks like that, she can have the icy touch of death. I mean, I'm sure I can survive. But that little sequence when she's coming down to Earth, and some ridiculous 2 thugs are like, "Wow, she looks like she's got money. We're going to rob her." And, they shoot her. And by the way, she's like 9 foot tall. She's just massive. And they're like, oh, and all of a sudden you see the skulls in her eyes. And then it's a beautiful scene. John Buscema, he just draws the shadow and them against the wall. And they're against this wall. And then they're shriveling because they're dying.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, it wasn't your time, but I can hasten it for you. Oh. One of my favorite scenes in the entirety of Marvel's history. I'm talking about 15,000 Marvel books. That scene there is one of the every time.
She actually says, and I quote, "I shall hasten your entrance into my silent realm." That's what she said.
Thank you, Stan. Because Stan, of course, Mr. Eloquent. No one could, get those words quite as nice sounding as Stan. So. Obviously, I'm reading the issue and I'm thinking, well, okay, this is going to be a tricky one. Thor just can't go in there blazing with his hammer. Hela's going to get her way. And I thought to myself, maybe Odin's going to step in, and of course, we get to the point where Thor is running all over the world. And finally, Hela says, okay, I'm going to bring you to me. And starts aging all these people. Again, John Buscema doing the beautiful thing. These firemen and policemen turning old. And finally Thor's like, you win. I'm gonna give myself to you.
Yeah, that's how that
page.
Yes.
Where he's just walking and she's just like welcoming him into her arms.
Yeah, that's the last panel too. And it says like next issue, like the awesome end. And then we go into, oh, what a cliffhanger. Then we go into issue
Yes.
190. Oh,
Look
there it
at
is.
that beautiful piece of art right there. Thor is beaten, his head is bowed, and
Oh.
she's like, I have my final victory. I am going to take the son of Odin now.
And Steve, look at how awesome John Buscema draws the cape of Thor. Look at that cape when he has the two arches on. I love it. It's brilliant.
Yes.
Brilliant.
So
Oh,
we're going to have to get to a point where in the next issue, 190.
190.
In 190.
And so to die.
Look at that magnificent issue. Odin is on Earth unbelievably. And by the way, when Odin was on Earth before, there was great ramifications. These days, writers have forgotten just how powerful Odin was.
Oh.
You know, so, of course, I had an idea that Odin was going to have to step in. And Odin does. He has this massively powerful scepter. And he fires it off. And she's like, Hela's like, well, even Odin wouldn't dare do this. And boom, this thing hits her and she's lying there flat on the floor. And then as a kid, of course, I didn't understand the ramifications of Asgardian history and everything like that. So I'm learning as I'm going along reading.
Interesting.
And Thor's teaching me. So Thor gets up and he's like, well, Father, I thank you, from the bottom of my heart for what you've done. But this can't stand. You have to bring her back to life. And the Odin's like, well, you're my son. I can't just let you die. And there's this beautiful flashback sequence where you see plants growing, no one dying. It's just beautiful. Those big sweeping melodramatic flashback sequences, which haven't happened, but Stan and John are showing you what's going to happen now that, there's no death on Earth. And I'm like, wow, Thor's going to have to do it. He's going to have to sacrifice himself for the rest of humanity, being the god that he is. So
Steve,
finally,
Steve, can I read you that panel? What
with pleasure.
Said? He goes, Thor hath been thy son in life. Shall he be less in death? Believe me, Father, I find life sweet and have no wish to die, but let me die 1,000 times rather than cause the calamity which is to come. Even as I speak, the chaos doth begin. And then that's when all the stuff, Stan could write it. The only person who could write it as good as Stan was Roy. And Roy told me how they always had to fix other people's, they always did the thys and the thes and the these wrong. So Roy and Stan always had to fix other people. But Roy was, how good. Oh, it's so good. Sorry, Steve. Sorry.
I agree with you 100%. Believe me, when later on when Roy gets on the book for another subject podcast down there, because I don't want to have a heart attack. Believe you me, I'm with you there. So consequently, Odin realizes that he has to bring Hela back. And boom, he uses the scepter. Whoop, she comes back to life again. And she's like, well, Odin is wise. Well done, Odin. And he's like, well, get on with it. A father's grief. Get on with it. And then there's that beautiful scene because she's already touched him. And Thor starts laboring and he's walking around and his face is aging and he's got that jaw and the gums are coming out.
Yes.
And, beautiful wording again, the aging, of, Asgard's finest. And then I'm thinking, what the hell? How is he going to get out? He's written this plot into a wall. How is he going to go around? And then, Odin says, well, there's one person that needs to be here to see, to see this. And boom, here comes Sif. And Sif comes along. And by the way, at this time, she's looking absolutely gorgeous in that little white dress that she's wearing.
Yes, yes, she does. Yes.
And she comes along and she's holding this disheveled husk of a man in her arms. And she's like, oh my God, I've finally got to meet you again after a period of time away, and you're going to be dying. And he's just like, there's a little scene where you see his hand sort of like this.
Yeah.
And then here is how the whole story ends, and how it made me. I mean, I remember sitting there stunned for about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this. So Sif goes to Hela and says, I'm willing to sacrifice myself for Thor. I will give yourself because, I am, it's love itself that I'm going to do. It's the sacrifice I can do. And Hela's like, what? And she's like, well, as a woman, right? You know what I mean? And then this is the first time that I realized, wait a minute, Hela has not been portrayed as a woman before. She's been this entity, fact of life, in Asgardian life, where she just comes, and finally she is, shown what love is. And then she realizes that she's never going to have this. She's never going to have love. She's never going to do any of that. So she, you see her turning around. She's like, okay, I'm going to give you this because love is the most powerful thing of all. And then she has this little tear coming out of her face.
Yeah, actually.
Oh my God.
Steve, actually 2 tears. Yeah, she's crying. Okay, go ahead.
So I remember that first time I went back 4 or 5 times to read the last couple of pages. I remember I just kept reading it, and the emotions were just welling up in me, and I was like, oh my God, and then I was like, there's got to be, of course, I was such a weird romantic like little kid. I don't know why. Forgive my sins, okay? But I was always like, well, Hela's got to find someone somewhere. There's got to be someone that can love Hela, whatever it is. And of course, to this day, that hasn't happened. But, if I was writing Thor, I would do that in a second. But so after I put that issue away, I went to sleep. I got up in the morning and I went to school. And I met my buddy. His name was Barry. And I went, Barry, I've got to tell you something very important. He's like, what? And I said, I love Thor. I said, it's the best thing I've ever read. And he's like, what? He goes, what do you do? I said, you're never going to believe it. And I tried to explain this. He goes, oh, no, I don't like Thor. It annoys me. And I was like, I've surpassed you now. I'm going to brush you aside and find others, that are in the way of the world. And from that point on, I was a Thor fan. And all I had to do then was pick up a new issue of Thor. Now, this is where it gets funny and sort of this annoys a lot of people when I say this. And I'm sorry out there for anyone who's watching this. What I'm about to say is going to break the internet. Okay? People are going to throw themselves off buildings, throw themselves into volcanoes. The first issue I picked up of Thor that was on the rack was issue 339. Okay.
Ooh.
Now, I had never heard of Walt Simonson. First thing I thought was I didn't like the art.
Yeah.
Forgive me. I have sinned.
I
didn't like the art that much. I was confused about the story. And I knew that something was happening and there was going to be a new hammer forged or what. And I was sort of reading it. And I was like, oh, I don't think I'm going to collect Thor for right now. I'm being honest. And when I tell the story to people, and I believe you me, there seems to be 2 eras of Thor fans in this world.
Yes.
Kirby and Simonson. Okay, and the Simonson, they're like rabid dogs. You try to say, and they're like, they're at your throat.
Wow, 337 and 338 and 339. Those were the new Thor Bibles, man. That was the new age.
And there's me coming along, fresh and new, and going, oh. Now, maybe things would have been different if I picked up a 337, okay? However, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. And time would have to pass. It wasn't until years later on when I picked up, and of course, we're not going to get into it now, but later on in another podcast, I'm going to be slathering and dripping because I picked up issue 386 of Thor with Tom DeFalco, Ron Frenz, Brett Breeding, and they introduced the Celtic gods.
Yeah.
And from then on, I was like, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm subscribing.
Well, they went back to basics. They went back to
they went back. And of course, you're 100% right.
The other thing I wanted to tell you about
doing the best John Buscema art there was.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to tell you about Walt Simonson and coming into that 80s, like, so, I was never about sketchy type art. I mean, like, I know people like that's what Walter was to me. It was kind of sketchy, and same with like Bill Sienkiewicz. Like, I look at that stuff today, and yes, I appreciate it more. But even Frank Miller, once again, I'm ducking out of the way here. But
we're getting into trouble today.
Yes, it's just like that sketchy type of abstract type of comic art
Mm.
just never registered in my brain. Once again, this is where we have our bond here, Steve, is that when you're looking at those older issues of the John Buscema, Sal Buscema, Jack Kirby, there was solid art, solid like anatomy, but beautifully done, especially when Sinnott was in there. Even Steranko, when Sinnott hit Steranko, like I that's the stuff that singed into my head. So when I got into those later issues, even Mike Magnolia, like it was too sketchy, it was too abstract. All that stuff started becoming vogue in those later 80s and stuff. And I just, the Dark Knight Returns, like I just couldn't get into it as much. I appreciate it, yes, but like it'll never be like that, especially those Marvels, so many of that. And all those artists were consistent like that. That was the template of how you were supposed to do it. And it cannot ever be touched. I am sorry. You got the Mona Lisa and then you got this stuff. Like it's just so unbelievable. Once again, not to take anything away from Simonson and all that stuff, but I know what you're talking about. That art is so impressionable, and it was solid though. I didn't like the shadows and all that stuff. And like, no, there's a proper way to do that. Comic, So yes,
if
I totally understand.
Is to add one caveat to that little piece right there. Years later, when they reprinted the Simonson stories and they recolored it, they tidied it up, and that's the only way you can really read it today. That old newsprint does not work well with the Walt Simonson art. However, I'm going to tell people, okay, if you have not picked up an omnibus or some sort of nice reprint collection where they recolored it and tidied it up, then finally I'm like, all right, here we go. This is good. Now, yes, no one is going to match John Buscema for me. John Buscema is my favorite artist of all time, and is so high up there, okay, that it just cannot be approached. I love Kirby, but even John Buscema, I like John Buscema's art even more than Kirby. And again, wow, the internet's cracking. Let me hold the internet together right now. We're going to hold it together. But for me, after reading that story, one thing became plain. I began to look at the credit boxes. I was like, who is producing this work? And I saw the name, Stan Lee. Okay. Now, I had no idea when I was reading these reprints. The Stan had already moved on. He didn't do any writing anymore, and this was a lesson I was going to learn, of course, when I read some modern writers. And I'm like, this isn't quite up to the same standard. And I realized there's only one Stan. Okay. And then I began to explore a little bit more. But this was the first time I remember taking a look at those credit boxes. Not only the artist, I wanted to know who the inker was. I think one of the issues is inked by Jim Mooney. I know it was a little darker, and I was like, wow, this is really fascinating. But from that point on, I had that in my head. So if someone said, hey, Steve, who's your favorite writer and artist? I would say Stan Lee and John Buscema. Quite proudly, even though I had read nothing else really. I mean, who in the hell am I to say that? I had been exposed. But here's the key. Here I am in 2022. I read those reprints in 1985, maybe 1984. Okay? No one did beat it.
No one. No.
I read all the way back. I've read from 1961 up now. I've read all the writers. I've read everything. I've seen every way of. Now, some people have got close, to impressing me that much. Of course, I love Sal Buscema and I love Ron Frenz. But I'm proud. I'm going to say it, the statement. In 2022, Stan and John Buscema are the ultimates. And of course, that would again. By the way, I hadn't even seen the Silver Surfer series yet.
Yeah.
Can you believe what was coming my way?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is going to make you crazy, Steve. And John didn't like drawing superheroes at all. That's why he went with Thor, and that's why he went with Conan, because Thor still had that majesty to it, like the fantasy to it, and he needed to learn a lot about comics through Kirby, because he did it. He kept on getting yelled at by Stan. Can you believe the art that he produced? And here's something to go right back to John Buscema for really quickly. Here is everybody thinks of the great John Buscema maybe ever on Silver Surfer #4, like it's just magnificent. Stan didn't like that issue. He changed history later when they said like, oh, Stan loved that. He didn't. And John was so frustrated. Roy had to talk to him. But remember, think about those pages he was presenting in front of Stan of those issues, and Stan didn't like them. So as good as John Buscema was, he was never really appreciated. And I think that's a big reason why he always went with Roy, because once again, the genius of Roy Thomas behind the scenes understood his genius where Stan didn't really see it. And that's why you got the Roy Thomas, John Buscema team up there, that they were always together, because John loved Roy, and Roy had his writing geared to his art. It was just so perfect. And those Thor ones that you were reading, he was just kind of winging it and trying to do Jack Kirby, his style, and Sinnott just pasting them up. Yeah. And how magnificent that was. Incredible. What a genius. Steve, it was awesome hearing about this. And now I understand, as I read through it, why you didn't go into 191, because it does. I didn't think of that when I read it, because it ends on such a cliffhanger. Obviously, Stan has to keep it going, but now I see the infinity, the true infinity of what was going on, and the majesty and the beautiful, like, perfect comic books. And they don't, and just really quick, they don't go for that much, right? Like, how much do those usually go for? Like, you usually those for?
You know, it's funny you say that, but when I finally came over to the States, and the comics are plenty. I go to shows, I go to stores. I could never get high-grade copies of those issues. They're like, oh, here goes, here's 126 in VF Plus. Here's issue 150 VF Plus. Oh, what issue do you want? 186? Oh, hold on a second. Let me get the discount bin. I got a VG copy for you. It drove me nuts. I went around and I was asking everyone. I said, do you have like a VF or a near mint copy of 184 through? Oh, no. I think they're back at the store somewhere. No one cared. It drove me nuts. So it wasn't until years later on I came across a dealer, and he knew he had clean copies. At the time in the guide, they were $12 a piece.
Yeah.
He said, Steve, I'm selling them for 30 each. 30. And I went like this. Whoosh! I threw the money into his face. Said, take my money. Take my soul. Oh, these are the best books. He's like, God's sakes, this guy's weird. I'm holding the books like this. Finally! I still have those books in my collection today. I also bought 2 low-grade copies, and I had Stan Lee sign my issues 189 and 190.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah.
I went to a signing, and he had a strict rule, only signing 1 book. And I looked over at the security guy, and I pulled out a second one, and Stan went, he goes, I remember these. He goes, yeah. And I said, this, Stan, is your finest hour for me. And he was like, wow. He goes, this was such great stuff, wasn't it? And he signed the books. I actually have a photograph of him signing it somewhere. And I still have those books. They're actually standing up on my shelf. They actually float in the air by themselves. That's how much power they have now.
The power cosmic.
Like this. What's going on? So don't go near those books. Don't even breathe.
All right, everybody. Did you see what we brought to you today? The passion, the love, the majesty, the power cosmic, all here. We'd like to thank you for joining us for issue number 2. Otto from the Grotto, thank you, 3 Men in a Base. Any last words, Otto? We got to throw you in here.
Thank you very much. I love hearing the storytelling about these books. Loved it. I was a 337 fan. That was interesting to me. I do want to agree with that. It was abstract. It wasn't as abstract as St. Kevin's was for me, but I still loved it. But I love the passion. I love it that you brought it. I'm going to go have to dig these up again because I loved Hella too, man. Let me tell you, that's great. And to hear this story, I need to go appreciate this. So thank you very much.
And Otto, you were really listening to Steve, because when he said the issue, you didn't put it up, and you were listening to him, and I'm saying in my
head.
head.
That was a ghost in the storytelling, man. It was like an audio book. So yeah.
I can't.
So you guys, thank you very much for always having me on, man. It's just been great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well,
so, thank you very
Otto,
much.
I really do appreciate your skills with the technology here and to get this format laid out for us. And I just want to let you know, I really appreciate what you're doing for us right now.
Absolutely. My pleasure, man. I'll do it all for comics, man. Don't worry about it.
And to everybody at home, the Steve and Cimino podcast says,
boom!